Welcome to the deep dive. You're probably here because you want your spoken English to sound, well, more fluent and natural.
Yeah, especially if you've got the IELTS speaking test coming up.
Exactly. And today, we're really zeroing in on one key part of that puzzle, linking words.
Yeah.
You might also hear them called connecting words or linkers.
Right. We've been looking closely at a study guide focused specifically on these for IELTS.
And our mission for this deep dive, to pull out the absolute essentials for you.
We want you to quickly grasp why they matter, the common slip-ups people make.
And crucially, how you can actually use them effectively.
Right, to boost that speaking score and just sound more like, well, you talking naturally, not like you're reading off a script.
Okay, so linking words. They sound simple enough, maybe, but why are they so important for speaking?
Think of them like bridges. Bridges between your sentences, between your ideas.
Okay.
They connect everything up, showing the listener how one thought flows into the next. Without them, well, speech can sound quite choppy.
It's connected.
Exactly. Disconnected. It makes it harder for the listener to follow along. They're really key for a coherence, making sense.
And I guess that's a huge part of sounding natural, isn't it? Because when we chat normally, we don't just list facts.
No, definitely not.
There's a flow, a rhythm.
Yeah,
And these linking words must be doing a lot of the heavy lifting there.
they really are. And the study guide, it really hammers this home. The main goal is to sound like natural, everyday conversation.
Not like a textbook.
Precisely. It's about getting that sort of effortless quality you hear when native speakers talk.
Right. But, even if you know your stuff, exams like IELTS add pressure. People must make some common mistakes with these.
Oh, absolutely. Several common pitfalls.
Like what? What's the biggest one?
Probably the most frequent is just not using enough of them or avoiding them.
Really? Why?
Sometimes people get so focused on, say, perfect grammar or finding the right vocabulary word that they forget about the connections. The linking phrases just fall by the wayside, and that leads straight back to that choppy, less fluent sound we mentioned.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like building with bricks, but forgetting the mortar. The structure just isn't solid.
That's a great analogy. Exactly. Then there's another big one, using linking words that are just too formal.
Ah, like the ones you see in academic essays.
Yes. Words like moreover, nevertheless, therefore, hence.
Okay.
Now, they have their place, definitely, in formal writing,
Yeah.
but in spoken English. Especially in a test meant to simulate conversation. They can sound really forced. Stilted, unnatural.
Yeah.
It kind of screams, I memorized this list, rather than I'm having a conversation.
Right. So maybe save furthermore for your written task 2 essay.
Probably a good idea.
Any other common problems?
Well, there's also just using them incorrectly, maybe picking a word that sounds similar but has a different nuance, or just putting it in an awkward spot in the sentence. Even if you're trying to link ideas, using the wrong tool or using it clumsily can still mess up the natural flow. Overusing them can be a problem too, actually.
Okay, so avoid them, bad. Use overly formal ones, bad. Use them wrongly, also bad.
Pretty much, yeah.
So we know the why and the what not to do. How do we actually get better at this? What's the strategy?
The guide suggests a really practical approach, which I like. It says, focus on the linking words you actually feel comfortable with.
Comfortable.
Yeah, the ones that you can imagine yourself genuinely using in a normal chat. Things that sound natural to you.
Okay, so not trying to learn a massive dictionary list.
Definitely not. Forget the huge lists. Pick a smaller set of useful, natural-sounding ones, and then practice them.
How?
Use them in sample sentences. Say them out loud. Repeat them until putting them into your own sentences feels, well, automatic. Second nature.
So it's quality over quantity. Master a core group rather than knowing hundreds badly.
Exactly that. The aim is smooth integration, not just ticking a box that you used a linker.
Makes sense.
And the guide, it points out some really common high-frequency ones that are perfect starting points.
Like the real basics.
Yeah, the absolute workhorses. Words like also, but, so, and though. You hear these constantly in everyday English. They're foundational.
Right, you almost don't even notice them. They're so common. What about some that are a bit more nuanced? The guide mentioned besides.
Besides. Yeah, that's an interesting one. The guide points out it's often used to add an extra point, almost like an afterthought.
An afterthought. How's
Yeah.
that different from just saying and or also?
It's subtle. And or also feel like straightforward additions. Besides, often introduces a slightly different angle or an extra justification that maybe wasn't the main point initially.
Can you give an example?
Sure, like, I don't really want to go out tonight. It's raining. Besides, I'm feeling pretty tired.
Okay. The tiredness is like an extra reason added on.
Exactly. It feels quite natural, like your thoughts are unfolding.
Got it. What about things like to be honest or to
Mhm.
tell the truth? They sound quite personal.
They do. And the guide flags these as great for adding authenticity, maybe a bit of sincerity.
Woohoo.
But they are definitely informal. You'd use them more in relaxed conversation, maybe with friends, not necessarily in a super formal context.
Right.
They signal you're giving your genuine opinion, maybe something slightly unexpected or direct.
Good to know. Keep the context in mind. Okay, moving on. Summarizing or simplifying. The guide mentioned overall and basically.
Yeah, two very useful ones. Overall is perfect when you want to give a general conclusion or summary after discussing several points, like overall it was a positive experience.
Okay, big picture.
Exactly. And basically, that's your friend when you need to boil down something complex.
Simplify it.
Right. You explain something tricky, then you might say, so basically what I mean is it cuts to the core idea. Really helps with clarity.
That sounds incredibly useful, especially if you feel you've been rambling a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, contrasting conditions. The guide had unless, while, and though. How do these work?
Okay, so unless sets a clear condition for something not happening. You won't pass the exam unless you study.
The negative condition. Got it.
While is often about contrast between two things happening simultaneously or two different aspects. While I enjoy living in the city, I sometimes miss the countryside.
Comparing two sides.
Right. And though is also for contrast or concession. It acknowledges one thing, but then introduces an opposing or balancing point. Like, the tickets were expensive, though the show was amazing.
And you can use though at the end sometimes, can't you?
You absolutely can. The show was amazing, though. It often sounds a little softer, more conversational when used at the end like that.
Interesting nuance. Okay, unless for conditions. While for direct contrast, though, for contrast concession, sometimes gentler. What about alternatives? Instead
Yeah.
and instead of.
Right, these indicate a replacement or substitution.
And there's a little grammar point here the guide mentioned.
Yes, a crucial one. Instead can often stand by itself or at the end of a sentence. We didn't go to the cinema, we went for a walk instead. But instead of always needs something after it, a noun or a gerund, which is the in form of a verb used like a noun.
Right, like.
Instead of going to the cinema, we went for a walk, or we had tea instead of coffee. You need that of plus the thing being replaced.
Got it. Instead of plus noun gerund. Good one to remember. Now, two that often trip people up. Actually versus in fact. They seem similar?
They do, but the guide clarifies a useful distinction. Actually is often used to sort of correct a potential misunderstanding or introduce surprising information or contrast with what was expected.
Okay, like a gentle correction or surprise.
Yeah, I thought the meeting was tomorrow, but actually it's today. Or he looks serious, but actually he's very friendly.
Right, and in fact.
In fact, is more about confirming or strengthening a previous statement, often by adding specific evidence or emphasis.
So building on what was said.
Exactly, like the weather was terrible. In fact, the wind blew down several trees. It adds weight or detail to the first point.
Okay, so actually clarifies or contrasts with expectations. In fact, supports or emphasizes what's already been said. That's a really helpful distinction.
It is, isn't it? Getting that nuance right makes a difference.
And one more the guide mentioned for emphasis.
Yeah.
Especially.
Simple but effective, especially, just highlights one particular thing within a broader category. I love Italian food, especially pasta.
Great. So we've run through a really practical toolkit of linkers here. Let's bring it back to the listener prepping for IELTS. How does mastering these really impact their score?
Well, it hits key marking criteria directly. Using these words well naturally correctly demonstrates coherence, which is about how your ideas connect logically.
Okay.
And it demonstrates fluency speaking smoothly without unnatural hesitation, keeping the flow going.
And examiners are specifically listening for that.
Absolutely. Coherence and fluency is one of the 4 main assessment criteria. Using linkers effectively makes you sound less hesitant, more organized in your thoughts, basically more like a confident, proficient speaker of English.
So it can directly translate to a higher band score.
Without a doubt, it's a very tangible way to improve.
So it's not just window dressing.
Yeah.
It's fundamental to showing you can communicate effectively. It's not just about knowing words and grammar rules.
No.
It's about weaving them together, creating that flow.
Precisely. It shows the examiner you can manage conversation, structure your thoughts on the fly, connect ideas, just like you would naturally.
This has been incredibly useful. So quick recap then. Linking words are vital for sounding natural and coherent, especially for IELTS. Key mistakes are using too few, using overly formal ones like nevertheless, or using common ones incorrectly.
Right. Avoid those pitfalls.
And the strategy is to focus on common, comfortable linkers, practice them until they're automatic, rather than memorizing huge lists.
That's the core message. Master the useful basics.
And remember those specific examples besides, for afterthoughts, the informality of, to be honest, using basically to simplify.
The grammar of instead of, and that key difference between actually for clarifying and in fact for supporting.
Yeah, those details really matter.
They add that layer of naturalness.
Okay, so a final thought for you, our listener, to take away from this deep dive. Start actively listening for these linking words when you hear native English speakers. In podcasts, movies, conversations. Notice which ones pop up frequently.
Yeah, how do they actually use them? How do they weave them in?
Exactly. Pay attention to that natural flow they create. And then think, how can you start incorporating some of those naturally into your own speaking? It's all about making those connections.
In your speech and in your learning. Great point to end on.